Now what we have here are the 48 contiguous states. Washington, D.C. and Hawaii and Alaska were not included in these data sets. I have the name of the state code, and then a whole bunch of searches that I personally just chose off the top of my head. Searches for data science, cluster analysis, then college, startup, entrepreneur, CEO, mortgage, because it might have something to do with finances. Then I have a few sports terms, searches for NBA, NFL, MLB, Major League Baseball, and FIFA for soccer. Then, because I like it, I have searches for modern dance, and then I have 3 cars, Prius, Escalade, Subaru. Then I have a few other, kind of silly ones. I have Jello and BBQ and the royal family. And then 2 completely irrelevant terms, obfuscation and unicorns. Then what I have is information from a published research paper about 5 personality dimensions measured at a state level: extroversion, agreeableness, conscientiousness, neuroticism, and openness. And then states are put into one of 3 different categories. And then I also have the basic demographic regions and divisions. Now, to get a little bit better understanding what's going on here, let me go to a text file that's included with the data. And that gives the regions. And then the psych regions, number 1 is friendly and conventional. Number 2 is relaxed and creative. 3 is temperamental and uninhibited. And then I have sources for the original research paper and some statements about it too. So I'm going to be using this information for clustering in all of my examples. When you open up the script in RStudio, the first thing we're going to do is load the data using R's read.csv. You need to give the location of the file, and this is saved on the desktop of my Mac, and you may need to indicate that it has a header. So I'll do that, and then I'll check the column names, and I'll zoom in on this output here. And you can see that we have the 30 variables that I listed just a moment ago. Go back. Now, for purposes of the clustering, I only want the numerical data. I don't want the psychological regions or the demographic regions, and I don't want the state names because those would interfere with the way the clustering works. So I'm going to save a new data set that has only the quantitative variables, the numerical variables. I'll save it into one called ST for states. I'm also going to take the names of the states, the 2-letter versions, and save those as the row names or index numbers. So they're in the data set, but they don't get analyzed as part of the cluster analysis. And then I'm going to run the column names again. And you can see now that we have a smaller number of variables, and it's only the quantitative ones. By the way, for comparison purposes, I'm going to create an even shorter, smaller data set that has only the 4 sports searches for NBA, NFL, MLB, and FIFA. And we'll call that sports. And there you can see the first few lines of that. I'll zoom in on it. All right, let's now do the clustering. Now clustering, I'm going to do a hierarchical clustering. That's the easiest kind to do here. And you can do this in a few different steps, or you can do it all at once. What I'm going to do is I first have to create a distance matrix. So using all the quantitative variables, R will calculate how far away each of our cases are from each other. It's using Euclidean distance. So I do that with dist, and I feed that into an object called D, and then I use the hclust command. And then that'll make the clusters, and I'll just get a little bit of information on the clustering here. I'll zoom in on that. All it tells us is that it did complete Euclidean, and there were 48 observations or cases. You can also nest it all into one line if you want. Oh, excuse me. Sorry, too far. Next, I'm going to plot a dendrogram of the clusters. I'll just run this command with a title on it, and then I'll zoom in on that. And what you see here is based on the variables that I have in the data set, R is categorizing or grouping the variables this way. West Virginia is kind of all by itself there on the far left. My state, Utah, is near the right. And you get an idea of how similar things are. So for instance, about 1/3 of the way from the left, you can see that Oregon and Washington are right next to each other. That makes sense. And Arizona and Colorado are right next to each other. On the other hand, some of them might be a little more unusual, such as Alabama and Michigan going together. But they join based on the particular variables that we have in this data set. I'll go back to the code for a moment. Now I want you to compare that to what it looks like if we use just the sports searches. So I'm going to run this command in one line, and I'll zoom back in on the results. And now you can see we get a very different kind of clustering. Arizona and Minnesota are there on the end. And I can go back and forth between the two. Here's the one we did a moment ago. And here's the one we did right now. And you can see these are profoundly different clusterings. And that lets you know how deeply influenced clustering is by the variables that you feed into it. And so that's something that you always want to keep in mind when conducting and interpreting your analyses.